One of the best things that I've done today is listen to Jamal's Larty on Fresh Air. Listening to the podcast today helped me clarify some thinking about unconscious racial bias that I've experienced recently. Talking about the Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper incident in Central Park a few weeks ago, he said, and I quote, "The reason the Amy Coopers of the world feel so comfortable using the police as their own personal racism valet is because that's in line with how they have operated within our society." End quote. Then he goes on to say, which is to say, even if you or I or we have never called the police on a black person for some deeply unserious reason, as a society, we outsource the keeping of the racial order to police every day. End quote. That statement about how we outsource the keeping of racial order to the police every day, even when we haven't called the police on a black person for something deeply unserious, ties into what I've been experiencing the last couple of days. I've had two people outright deny their contribution or the possibility that they could have said something or had some unconscious bias in their decision making. They outright denied the possibility that race was involved in our conversation or how I felt they may have treated me, and immediately began defending themselves. There was no room for listening or considering what I was saying to them with regard to how a person of color may feel slighted by the things that they had spoken or written to me. One of them went straight to anger and began telling me how angry she was at me, as if that was supposed to elicit some particular response from me, perhaps an apology because I pointed out the possible unconscious bias in her actions. The point that Lardy made that informs me is that is even though persons may not have gone so far as to call it the police on a black person, perhaps they have felt they have done good for people of color or been some type of do-gooders throughout their lives and supported racial equality or diversity or multiculturalism. The fact remains that they still could be the source of unconscious bias if they haven't done the work of trying to become intentionally anti-racist or more multiculturally competent. Where I work, for example, we know from implementing a professionally developed instrument called the IDI that most people in that environment are what are known as minimizers. They minimize the differences between people due to race or ethnicity or any other factor that makes a person different. Minimizers don't see any difference between people, how they are as human beings, and tend to deny those differences and want to see people as the same. In fact, this is an indicator that they are not able to recognize bias, nor prejudice, nor unconscious racism. In fact, this is an indicator that they can't. But the fact that a person won't even consider that they could be the source of unconscious bias or racially motivated behavior says, in my mind, they probably are not even minimizing. They're downright denying differences outright, which is even more troubling and a greater indicator of the need to work on reducing their tendency towards unconscious bias and racist behavior.